Police sirens shattered the polished calm of the charity auction just as the final bid climbed past $10 million. Crystal chandeliers flickered overhead, reflecting flashes of blue and red across marble floors that had never known chaos. Guests turned in confusion as officers pushed through the crowd with quiet authority. Their destination was not the stage, but a woman standing near the back of the ballroom, frozen in disbelief as her name was called. She had been invited as a junior analyst, barely important enough to be noticed. Yet now, every eye in the room was fixed on her as an officer presented a warrant accusing her of stealing classified financial records tied to an ongoing billion-dollar fraud investigation. Evidence, they claimed, was undeniable. Security footage placed her at the restricted server room. Her credentials had been used minutes before the files disappeared. She tried to speak, but the weight of accusation silenced her. She had never even seen those files. As cold metal cuffs closed around her wrists, a single message arrived on the lead investigator's phone from an unknown sender. 2 words. Release her. But what happened next changed everything. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure you're subscribed, because this one gets intense. The woman in handcuffs was not someone who belonged in scandals. Her name was Lena Okoye, a financial data analyst whose presence in Seoul's elite corporate world had always felt temporary, like she was walking through a building designed for someone else's reflection. She had arrived in the city 3 years earlier with a scholarship, a quiet determination, and a promise to herself that she would build a life defined by skill, not sympathy. Seoul had rewarded her discipline with opportunity, but never quite acceptance. By day, she worked on the 32nd floor of Hanul Capital, a prestigious investment firm known for managing assets powerful enough to influence markets. Her responsibilities were technical, buried deep within spreadsheets, audit trails, and algorithmic forecasts. She was trusted with numbers, but rarely invited into conversations. In boardrooms, her silence was interpreted as professionalism. In private, she understood it as distance. Colleagues described her as efficient, quiet, invisible. Invisible until tonight. The charity auction where she was arrested had been organized by the same firm that employed her. Attendance was considered an honor, proof that one had entered the inner orbit of influence. Lena almost hadn't attended. Invitations like that often felt more like tests than celebrations. But declining would have been noticed. So she arrived in a simple black dress, careful not to outshine anyone, careful not to appear ungrateful. Careful, as always. Earlier that evening, she had stepped away from the ballroom to answer an urgent email from the compliance department. The message requested confirmation of a data reconciliation task she did not remember performing. Assuming it was an automated error, she accessed the internal system briefly, verified nothing unusual, and returned to the event without a second thought. That moment would now define everything. Investigators claimed the system log showed her credentials entering a restricted archive minutes later. The files accessed were tied to a confidential investigation involving hidden offshore transfers and falsified corporate disclosures. Information valuable enough to destroy reputations, or build empires. According to digital records, Lena had copied everything. Standing in the harsh white light of the precinct interrogation room hours later, the accusation felt unreal. The walls were bare except for a clock whose ticking seemed louder than necessary. Across the metal table, 2 investigators studied her with expressions that revealed little patience for innocence. They presented printed logs, timestamps precise to the second. Her ID badge had accessed secure corridors. Her login credentials had decrypted encrypted folders. Her workstation IP address matched the extraction point. Every detail aligned perfectly. Too perfectly. Lena stared at the documents, searching for a flaw, a misplaced digit, anything that could explain how her identity had been used as a weapon against her own future. Her memory offered nothing. No suspicious emails. No unfamiliar faces lingering near her desk. No warning that her life was about to fracture into before and after. One investigator leaned forward, voice calm but edged with finality. "Miss Okoye, this level of coordination does not happen by accident." A pause. Then a quiet realization settled in her chest like cold iron. Someone hadn't just stolen data. Someone had chosen her to take the fall. And somewhere beyond the concrete walls of that room, someone was watching the consequences unfold, waiting to see if she would break. Morning arrived without comfort. The fluorescent lights inside the detention corridor never dimmed, erasing any sense of time passing. Lena sat on a narrow bench outside the interrogation room, her wrists no longer restrained, yet the invisible weight of accusation pressed heavier than metal ever could. Hours had passed, but clarity had not followed. Only deeper confusion, and a growing awareness that the system had already decided who she was. Guilty. Across the table, investigators began again, patient, methodical, relentless. Their questions were no longer exploratory, they were strategic. Each detail presented not as inquiry, but as confirmation of a narrative already written. Why had her credentials accessed the restricted archive at 8:42 p.m.? Why had her security badge opened a corridor requiring executive clearance? Why did the extracted files appear briefly on a device registered to her employee ID? Every answer she gave sounded weaker than the last. I didn't access those files. The sentence repeated so often it began to lose shape. Digital evidence did not forget. Systems did not misremember. According to the logs, she had entered the building's secured data wing twice in the past month, entries she could not recall making. Surveillance footage, grainy but convincing, showed a woman of her height, her build, her posture, walking through restricted areas with purposeful calm. The timestamp matched her ID usage exactly. The image was indistinct enough to raise doubt, but precise enough to destroy her credibility. Her phone had been confiscated shortly after her arrest. When investigators unlocked it, they discovered encrypted messages routed through anonymous servers, fragments of communication suggesting coordination with an unknown third party. The messages did not include explicit instructions, but the tone implied familiarity with confidential systems. Lena read the transcripts in disbelief. I've never seen this before. One investigator observed her reaction closely, searching for hesitation, guilt, calculation. Instead, he saw only confusion, which made the situation more complicated. Because either she was an exceptional liar, or someone had constructed an almost flawless digital shadow in her image. By midday, the consequences expanded beyond the interrogation room. News of the arrest spread internally through Hanul Capital. Her company email access was suspended. Her employee profile was marked under investigation. Colleagues who had once nodded politely in elevators now avoided mentioning her name entirely. Silence became its own verdict. The legal implications were severe. Corporate espionage charges carried prison sentences. As a foreign national, conviction could also result in permanent deportation and financial blacklisting across international firms. Her career, everything she had worked to build, now hung on data she could not explain. Then came the detail that unsettled even the investigators. The stolen files had not yet surfaced anywhere. No transfer activity. No leaks. No financial movement. It was as if the theft itself had never been the objective. Which raised a more dangerous possibility. The objective may have been her. Late that afternoon, as procedural paperwork was being processed, a junior officer entered the room carrying her confiscated belongings. Her phone, sealed in an evidence pouch, vibrated faintly on the metal tray. A delayed notification had finally forced its way through network restrictions. An unknown message. No sender identification. No timestamp. Only 6 words displayed across the cracked screen. You were never meant to understand. The officer frowned, assuming it irrelevant. But Lena felt something colder than fear settle beneath her ribs. This was not random. This was intentional. Somewhere, someone already knew how this story would unfold. And they were making sure she did too. By the second night, exhaustion began to distort the edges of reality. Time inside the holding facility moved without rhythm, marked only by the echo of footsteps in corridors and the quiet slide of documents across metal tables. Lena had repeated her statement so many times the words began to sound detached from meaning, like fragments of a conversation she was only overhearing. But the investigators were no longer focused solely on proving her guilt. They were beginning to question the elegance of the crime itself. The deeper forensic analysis went, the more unsettling the pattern became. The breach showed signs of expert-level manipulation, multi-layered authentication bypasses executed without triggering immediate alerts. Whoever had orchestrated the access understood Hanul Capital's internal architecture intimately. The extraction path had been designed not simply to steal files, but to survive scrutiny. It was surgical. Too precise for a junior analyst with limited system privileges. One forensic specialist quietly noted that certain authentication timestamps occurred milliseconds faster than human interaction typically allowed. It suggested automation, or access through an internal administrative override channel rarely used outside high-level security audits. Someone with authority. Yet the logs continued to lead back to Lena. At 2:17 a.m., the lead investigator received an unexpected call from the corporate legal division of Hanul Capital. Their tone had changed. The firm was now requesting accelerated closure of the case, citing reputational risk. They emphasized the importance of swift prosecution, of maintaining confidence among international partners. Pressure was being applied. Subtly, but unmistakably. The investigator found the timing curious. Corporate entities rarely push so aggressively unless something larger was at stake. He requested deeper access to internal audit trails, requests that were met with polite resistance. Meanwhile, Lena remained confined to procedural limbo. No formal charges yet filed, but no release granted. The uncertainty was intentional. Isolation often loosened inconsistencies in testimony. But Lena's story did not change. What did change was her memory. Somewhere between repeated questioning and restless attempts to reconstruct her recent weeks, a detail surfaced. Small. Almost insignificant. 3 days before the charity auction, her workstation had experienced a brief system malfunction. Her screen had frozen for approximately 12 seconds before restarting automatically. IT support later dismissed it as a routine background update. She had accepted the explanation without concern. Now, that moment felt heavier. When she mentioned the incident, investigators cross-referenced maintenance records. No scheduled update had been recorded for her device at that time, which meant something had accessed her terminal without logging standard administrative activity. The forensic team re-examined the system architecture and discovered a shadow process embedded within archived activity logs, a fragment of code designed to mimic user behavior while masking external command triggers. It was sophisticated enough to remain invisible during routine checks, but not invisible forever. Then came the discovery that shifted the entire investigation. An encrypted internal routing key used during the breach was traced to a clearance tier beyond Lena's department. The authorization pathway intersected with restricted executive-level credentials belonging to individuals who would never personally interact with operational data extraction. Someone had borrowed power from above. Or someone above had allowed it. Before the implication could fully settle, a quiet directive arrived from higher authorities requesting the investigation limit internal exposure until further notice. The justification was framed as procedural caution. But the lead investigator recognized containment when he saw it. This was no longer simply a cybercrime case. It was becoming political. Later that evening, as Lena sat alone in the dim waiting area, an unfamiliar man in a tailored charcoal suit entered the facility. He did not approach the front desk immediately. Instead, he observed the room with calm attentiveness, as if measuring details others overlooked. When his gaze passed briefly over Lena, there was no curiosity in his expression. Only recognition. He spoke quietly with the desk officer, presenting identification that caused a subtle shift in posture among the staff. The officer nodded once, then disappeared through a secured door. Minutes later, the lead investigator was informed that a private legal representative had requested limited involvement in the case. No law firm name was provided. Only a single instruction relayed through official channels. Do not finalize charges yet. No explanation accompanied the request. Only influence. An influence at that level rarely appeared without purpose. For the first time since her arrest, Lena sensed the direction of the story shifting, though she did not yet understand why. Somewhere beyond her reach, forces she could neither see nor predict had begun to move. The man in the charcoal suit did not introduce himself immediately. He waited. Inside high-stakes situations, timing was often more powerful than information. He allowed the investigators to continue their process, allowed tension to tighten its grip around the room, allowed assumptions to settle just deeply enough to make disruption meaningful. When he finally spoke, his voice carried quiet authority, the kind that did not need volume to command attention. "I represent an interested party," he said calmly, placing a slim document folder on the table. The lead investigator studied him carefully. No insignia, no corporate branding, no indication of affiliation. Yet the room itself seemed to respond to his presence. Subtle adjustments in posture, a hesitation before speaking, a shared awareness that whatever was unfolding had extended beyond ordinary jurisdiction. "What interested party?" the investigator asked. The man did not answer directly. Instead, he opened the folder and slid forward a single sheet of printed data. At first glance, it appeared similar to the forensic logs already examined: timestamps, routing paths, authentication layers. But one detail immediately stood apart. An origin node previously classified as internal had been re-identified. External proxy insertion. Someone had remotely mirrored Lena's credentials weeks before the breach ever occurred. Which meant the crime had not begun on the night of the charity auction. It had begun long before she ever realized she was part of the story. The investigator leaned forward, scanning deeper into the technical annotations. Whoever had prepared this analysis possessed access to proprietary network structures not publicly available. Even internal teams required multi-tier authorization to compile this level of detail. "You obtained this how?" he asked. The man closed the folder. "The accuracy of the information is what matters." Silence stretched across the table. Because the implication was now undeniable. Lena had not simply been framed. She had been engineered into the perfect suspect. Further forensic correlation revealed additional anomalies. The encrypted messages discovered on Lena's phone had not originated from typical messaging infrastructure. Their encryption signature matched experimental routing technology used primarily in private security intelligence operations. Technology rarely accessible to corporate actors alone. The deeper the analysis went, the clearer the architecture of the setup became. Access credentials cloned through silent intrusion. Behavioral patterns replicated through adaptive machine learning scripts. Digital correspondence fabricated with linguistic patterns matching Lena's writing style. Someone had studied her closely. Months of quiet observation condensed into a single devastating moment. The lead investigator placed both hands on the table, considering the scale of resources required to orchestrate such precision. This was not the work of opportunistic criminals. This was strategic elimination. Lena's professional history was re-examined under a new lens. 6 months earlier, she had flagged a minor irregularity within a financial reconciliation report, a discrepancy dismissed at the time as routine accounting noise. The report had involved layered offshore entities connected indirectly to investment channels managed by Hanul Capital. Individually insignificant, collectively dangerous. Patterns began aligning with uncomfortable clarity. The stolen files were not random data. They were records connected to a hidden financial architecture capable of exposing a chain of silent partnerships stretching across multiple industries. If publicly revealed, the fallout would reach far beyond corporate embarrassment. It could trigger investigations powerful enough to destabilize entire networks of influence. And Lena had unknowingly come too close. The man in the charcoal suit listened as the investigative team outlined their evolving conclusions. His expression did not change, but the faintest nod acknowledged that events were unfolding precisely as expected. Finally, the investigator asked the question that had been building beneath every discovery. "Who exactly is your client?" The man paused briefly, as if deciding how much truth the room was ready to absorb. "My client," he replied evenly, has a vested interest in preventing false outcomes. The answer felt intentionally incomplete. Because the identity behind such intervention could not be ordinary. Hours later, a confidential request was delivered through an encrypted government liaison channel advising temporary suspension of prosecutorial action. The justification referenced insufficient evidentiary integrity, rare phrasing, legal language designed to slow momentum without fully revealing cause. Then came the moment that altered the trajectory entirely. The detention officer approached Lena's holding room with visible uncertainty. Her release authorization had not yet been finalized, yet new instructions had arrived overriding procedural sequencing. Conditional temporary clearance. No charges filed, for now. As she stepped cautiously into the corridor, the man in the charcoal suit stood waiting at the far end, hands calmly folded behind his back. "You are being given time," he said quietly. "Time for what?" Lena asked, her voice unsteady. His response carried neither comfort nor threat. "Time for the truth to surface." She hesitated, searching his expression for explanation. Instead, he offered only a final statement before turning to leave. "The person responsible believes you will disappear quietly." A pause. "Our employer believes otherwise." The corridor fell silent as the meaning settled slowly into place. Someone powerful had intervened. Someone powerful had decided her story was not finished. And somewhere beyond the reach of official records, a far more dangerous conflict had just begun to reveal itself. Freedom did not feel like freedom. When Lena stepped outside the detention facility, the night air felt unfamiliar, almost distant, as if the world had continued moving while she remained suspended between accusation and uncertainty. The city lights of Seoul shimmered across wet pavement, reflecting a reality that no longer felt stable. Nothing had been resolved. The charges had not been formally dropped. Her name remained quietly flagged inside systems she could not access, inside conversations she could not hear. She had not been cleared. She had been paused. A black sedan waited across the street, engine running, windows tinted dark enough to conceal whoever sat inside. The man in the charcoal suit stood beside the rear door, offering neither reassurance nor explanation. "You are not obligated to accept assistance," he said calmly. "But you are not safe without it." The words did not sound like persuasion. They sounded like fact. Lena hesitated only a moment before entering the vehicle. The interior carried the faint scent of leather and something colder, discipline, perhaps. The door closed softly behind her, sealing her inside a world operating by different rules. For several minutes, no one spoke. The car moved through late-night traffic with quiet precision, passing familiar streets that now felt layered with unseen observation. Every reflection in the glass seemed to carry possibility, of surveillance, of pursuit, of someone ensuring events unfolded according to plan. Finally, the man spoke. "The individuals responsible for your situation did not intend to simply accuse you," he said. "They intended to remove you." A chill moved slowly through her chest. "Remove? How?" "Professionally. Legally. Permanently." He explained that the financial irregularity Lena had noticed months earlier had intersected with a concealed investment structure quietly protected by influential intermediaries. Her discovery, though incomplete, created risk. Risk required management. Framing her for digital theft achieved multiple objectives simultaneously: discredit her professional credibility, isolate her legally, and bury the initial discrepancy beneath the noise of scandal. A quiet erasure. Efficient. Untraceable. Unless someone had been watching the watchers. The car slowed as they entered a secured underground parking structure beneath an unmarked high-rise. The building did not display corporate logos, yet security presence suggested quiet importance. Cameras tracked movement with mechanical precision. Access barriers opened without visible authorization. Inside a private conference room overlooking the sleeping city, Lena finally asked the question that had been building since her release. "Why would anyone intervene for me?" The man considered her carefully before answering. "Because your case is not isolated." He placed a tablet on the table and activated a series of documents. Financial flow diagrams appeared across the screen, illustrating layered transfers passing through shell entities spanning multiple jurisdictions. The complexity was staggering. Billions in movement concealed behind routine accounting language. Then he revealed the final detail. One of the shadow entities intersected with a private network long believed untouchable, an organization operating beyond legal transparency, known only indirectly through whispers in financial intelligence circles. An organization led by a figure rarely seen, but widely feared. A man whose influence extended across corporate, political, and underground economies. A man who preferred balance over chaos. And someone within that balance had acted without authorization. The man in the charcoal suit folded his hands calmly. Our employer does not tolerate unsanctioned manipulation of innocent variables. Innocent variables? Lena repeated quietly. He clarified. The emotional weight of this situation pressed fully into her awareness for the first time. Her life had nearly been erased not because of something she had done, but because of something she had almost discovered. She had come close enough to truth to become inconvenient. And now she had been noticed by someone far more dangerous than the individuals who tried to silence her. Who is your employer? She asked, her voice barely steady. The man met her gaze directly for the first time. A man who believes false accusations create imbalance. He paused. An imbalance attracts consequences. Silence filled the room as realization slowly formed. This was not simple protection. This was intervention from power. Not the loud, visible kind displayed in headlines, but the quiet authority capable of altering outcomes before they ever became public. You are not being helped out of kindness, the man continued. You are being helped because the truth matters to someone who ensures it is eventually revealed. The implication settled heavily. Someone unseen had reviewed her situation and decided she should not fall. Not yet. Outside the window, the city continued unaware that its invisible structures of influence had just shifted slightly. And somewhere in that hidden network, a single directive had already been issued. Release her. But the deeper message carried far more weight. Find who dared to frame her. In the days that followed, Lena's world did not return to normal. Normal no longer existed. Officially, the investigation into the alleged data theft remained ongoing. Publicly, Hanul Capital released a carefully worded statement acknowledging procedural inconsistencies, without admitting fault. Internally, the firm began a silent restructuring of departments connected to compliance oversight. Individuals once confident in their positions were suddenly transferred, placed on leave, or quietly removed from internal directories altogether. Invisible corrections. No headlines. No explanations. But movement was happening. Lena remained inside the protected environment arranged by the man in the charcoal suit, a controlled space where access points were monitored and communication filtered. She was not treated like a prisoner, but neither was she fully free. Her safety had become strategic. Because the deeper investigation had uncovered more than anticipated. Financial audit trails connected multiple shell corporations to decision-makers who had once appeared untouchable. Quiet alliances were dissolving. Internal rivalries, long hidden beneath professional decorum, began surfacing under pressure. What initially appeared to be a single act of digital framing was revealing itself as part of a much larger conflict over control. Someone had overreached. And someone far more powerful had noticed. One evening, the man in the charcoal suit entered the conference room carrying a final report. He placed it in front of Lena without unnecessary ceremony. The Internal Review Board has determined that evidentiary integrity was compromised, he said. The formal charges will not proceed. The words should have felt like victory. Instead, they felt like confirmation of something far more complex. Her name would not appear in criminal records. Her professional credentials would remain intact. The accusation that had threatened to erase her future would be quietly withdrawn under the justification of technical irregularities. But no public apology would follow. No admission of wrongdoing. Because the forces involved did not operate through public accountability. They operated through correction. What happens now? Lena asked quietly. The man considered the question carefully. That depends on whether you wish to continue asking questions, he replied. He explained that individuals who uncovered uncomfortable truths often face two choices: step away and rebuild quietly, or move forward with awareness that truth carried consequences. Either path required courage, because knowledge could not be unlearned. Before leaving, he offered a final piece of information, the only direct reference he would make to the individual whose influence had altered her fate. Our employer believes balance must be maintained, he said. And balance requires precision. The message was clear. The Korean Mafia boss who had intervened did not act impulsively. He acted when patterns threatened stability. And someone had created a pattern dangerous enough to command his attention. As Lena looked out across the city skyline once more, she understood something she had not fully grasped before. Her story had never been about proving innocence alone. It had been about surviving proximity to hidden power. Some truths remained buried because uncovering them reshaped everything around them. But some truths insisted on being seen. And now, she had a choice. Walk away, or follow the thread further. Because somewhere within the silent networks that governed unseen influence, one question remained unanswered. Who had believed she was disposable? And what would happen when that mistake was fully revealed?